welcome back to the channel. Today we are continuing the pediatric cancer series with...
Hi, my name is Julia, and I'm a friend of Alexandra's.
We see each other in person normally once a year or once every 2 years, and so
Yeah,
it is so nice to get to sit down with people more often and have these conversations.
I think that's like one of my favorite things. It's something that's so special because we met at camp, is that camp, it's more than just a place, it's the people. And if you ask me, like, would you want to go back to camp without the people there? Sure, it'd be fun. It'd be okay, but it wouldn't be amazing. And really, I think it's the people that really make it so much more.
Yeah. It's like, would I like to be sitting at the end of the dock drinking a cup of coffee? Yeah. Would I enjoy it as much without everyone there for adult week? And no.
And I think with adult weekend, it's so special. I think it's fun to see like the reunion of like friends coming together, different campers from different kind of eras and stuff like that, coming back and reuniting with that same common theme of having experienced childhood cancer. I think that's so special. But I think one thing I enjoy a lot about adult weekend is seeing some of those people who are coming and experiencing camp for the very first time, that for whatever reason, they didn't get to go to camp as a child or a teenager, and they're getting to experience this and kind of be exposed to a community of other people who've been through pediatric cancer, which I think is really cool to see them experience all the firsts. Because I honestly think your first summer at camp is probably the most magical because there are no expectations.
Yeah.
If anything, you think it's going to be horrible, probably.
Honestly, I don't know that I went in with any expectations other than the fact that I had been so isolated and I just needed to meet people my own age.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to meet people that weren't 60 and 70.
That's fair. I think for myself, I was really hesitant going to camp. If anything, I would say probably my mom was like, it's either camp or therapy. And I was like, well, I guess camp is the least stigmatizing of the two.
Yeah, so for us, it was camp or palliative care. Like,
okay.
those were the options on the table. And so we told my oncologist that I was going to camp.
And like, honestly, like, it surpassed my expectations. I think it was supposed to be a one-time thing, and I ended up going for 3 summers. They're probably some of the highlights of my life, those weeks, and memories I'll cherish for a lifetime. I think especially through having like adult weekends at camp and giving us the opportunity to reconnect as a community and come back together, share knowledge, share information. If people are experiencing late effects, giving heads up to other people so that they're like, okay, let me make sure that's on my radar, especially if you had similar treatments or similar diagnoses or stuff like that, or similar drugs. I think that's like so important. And I think honestly, it's so special. I often say, now that we're adults, when we were teenagers, yes, we had barriers of like trying to get to each other with people living all over the province and, various aspects like that. And I go, camp gave us the opportunity to create these relationships. And now it's up to us to choose to continue developing and fostering those relationships or to go forth and forge new relationships. It was interesting. The last time I was at camp, I asked 2 longtime campers that are now adults, and I asked them, try and picture your life having never experienced camp. And I was like, oh, that's a really intense question because I feel like so much of my identity is attached to camp, and I feel like it built so much confidence, so much leadership, and rebuilt that confidence that I think I kind of lost through treatment. I don't know if you experienced a similar thing.
Yeah, I also know very few places that would take somebody with a central line into an access central line into Algonquin Park. And camp is one of those places that did that. It's like, I don't know what the liability insurance is like that camp has to hold, but there's a very high bar of what actually scares them.
Yeah.
Flushing a central line in the middle of the woods on a 3-day camping trip did not faze that nurse.
think it's just that can-do attitude, right? You know, how can we make this happen?
Yeah.
How can we make this work? How can we be flexible? How can we be creative? You
And I
know?
would say like that attitude has, I would say at least in my life, has been carried through to it because it's like, oh, I had cancer. How hard can this be?
Yeah, exactly. I go like, oh, if I can get through that, you know, you can
Yep,
get through most things. And
exactly. It's like, we've done cancer, we've done the relapse scares. Like, really, how hard is this thing?
exactly, exactly. Someone was asking me at work, they're like, how do you identify yourself? Some people were describing themselves as, you know, a mother, a daughter, a friend, a sibling. In my mind, I was like, I identify as a camp kid, like loving nature, loving the outdoors, swimming, just anything outdoorsy is just my jam.
Yeah. What was your official diagnosis?
So I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that was in December 2011. So it feels like sometimes I describe the cancer experience as some days it feels like it was just yesterday. And then other days it feels like it was a lifetime ago, almost like a
Yeah.
close friend that you used to know very well that's no longer in your life, remembering their experiences. And it's kind of strange to describe it that way.
No, but I think the further out I get, like the more removed I feel from it. And then all of a sudden, like PTSD slaps you in the face, and you're like, actually, that's actually me too.
And I think
Unfortunately, we are the same person.
yeah, and I think as I'm like approaching the point where more of my life will have occurred after than before. And it seems like such a weird concept because I think back to like that period of time when I was diagnosed and we were going through scans and waiting to start treatment, trying to figure out what the plan was. It felt so distant to think I could live more life after than before. Such a foreign concept to even think of that, you know? And now I'm like, and like to some degree, I think cancer does divide your life into before and afters, similar to the way I think people perceive COVID, right?
Yep.
A super traumatic event, and you describe your life as befores and afters. And the more removed you become from it, the like more you'll forget little things. When did this happen? When did that happen? Some of the nuances and details. And sometimes it's refreshing to forget. And then, but also like wanting to remember at the same time, kind of that complex dichotomy, if that makes any sense.
It does. And it's interesting, like you had Hodgkin's, I had non Hodgkin's. I was diagnosed on a Monday and started chemo on Saturday.
Yeah. And I think with mine, because it was an early stage, pretty much like how my diagnosis happened was they called us Christmas Eve. Actually, well, I'll rewind. We went in for the biopsy on December 23rd.
Mm-hmm.
It was supposed to happen on the 22nd, but they said, you know what? Just too many things happened. I was like a last minute addition to like the surgery list for the biopsy. So we were kind of like, if something major happens, then it's definitely not happening today. So we're just waiting there and they're like, okay, come back on the 23rd. So we come back on the 23rd. And I'm like, I'm not coming to the hospital on Christmas Eve. I'm not coming on Christmas Day. Absolutely not. And they told us when we did the biopsy on the 23rd, they're like, you're not going to hear from us for 10 days. So, kind of at that point, me and my parents had made the decision well, there's nothing we can do for the next 10 days. There's no point moping about it. Like, yes, it's going to be hard to carry on and put on brave faces when
Mm-hmm.
we saw, you know, family members over the holidays, but we weren't going to say anything because you never knew who's like which grandparent it could be their last Christmas that year. So we kind of stayed silent, but like meanwhile, my neck's like kinked like this permanently from the biopsy. I'm in so much pain and just trying to push through and put on a brave face. And, you know, we told the relatives when we walked in, like, we do not want to talk about this. And like now I see it as like coming from a place of love. They were like, you can just tell us, like, it's okay, whatever it is. And we were like, honestly, we can't even process this. Literally, and in some cases, we were seeing family on Christmas Eve and on Boxing Day. Like, we had barely even processed the information, let alone tell you when it's, some of the big questions people ask when you're diagnosed is, what's the outlook? What's the treatment plan? What does that entail? And we'd be like, I honestly don't know. I think they suggested the hospital at one point to show up the first day the medical day unit opened, to just show up there. No appointment, nothing. And my mom's like, no, we're not going to show up there when there's no appointment. What? My mom's like, it's going to be a zoo with everyone who's just barely made it through the holidays who needs assistance. Just book us an appointment for when you can and we'll keep moving. Obviously, it's not that serious where we're needing to start treatment immediately, like in your case, where if it was, they'd be like, okay, you're not leaving here. You're coming in right now and starting treatment.
Basically, we went in for my intake with oncology and my PET, and I did not leave the hospital for, I think, 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
I don't think I left the hospital until June 17th. And I was admitted on May 31st. It was like, oh, apparently I live here now.
Yeah. When you'd go in for something like that, you wouldn't be expecting to stay. So, right, you're not bringing an overnight bag. You're like, it's just a scan.
No, and like you get to a level of preparedness as an oncology family. There's a bag packed. Mom's purse has charging cables so that when a clinic day turns into a 15-hour clinic day, you can charge phones and iPads.
Yeah.
And there are snacks. But for those first 1 or 2 sessions of that, you don't know that.
Exactly. You don't know what to expect. I'm trying to think. So yeah, navigating the holidays was interesting. And then I remember it was also a little bit traumatic from that period, because one of the girls I went to elementary school with, her brother actually had passed away from cancer about 10 days or so before I was diagnosed. So it was super traumatic to, it was a different kind of cancer. And I remember in the waiting room when they told me they were doing the biopsy in December, it was still fresh. We had just gone to the funeral. And I remember them saying talking to the doctor and being it's just so scary and hit so close to home. And I remember him being this is a very different kind of cancer that we suspect that you have. That cancer is that the person passed away from is quite aggressive and not as great outcomes. And I think back to the team of medical professionals, and I remember some of the words that I kept hearing towards the beginning was, this is curable, this is treatable, you're going to get through this right away, this is one of the best cancers you could have. And I remember hearing all those words, and at the time it was so overwhelming because you're cancer, I'm scared, but I think so reassuring. And I remember when I was first diagnosed, my mom said, good news. They say, we've seen this before. And even better news, they're saying they're using the words treatable and curable. They would not be using those words if they're we've never, you're not hearing, we've never seen this before. What is this? We don't know what we're doing. You're not hearing that. So I'm okay, perspective changed,
Yeah. No, I remember showing up at camp for a teen weekend and somebody walking towards me who was in my age group that I didn't know, and her stopping in front of me and going, "You're the one that had the shitty lymphoma, aren't you?" And it was I had always known that Burkitt's, the outcomes of Burkitt's aren't particularly good.
Yeah.
But it was the first time somebody in the camp world and the cancer world went, "Oh, I had a lymphoma, but I didn't have something like that." And I went,
yeah, no, for sure. For sure. And I think it's it's so different, right? And it's I even go okay, you have the good cancer. And I think having all those positive affirmations at the beginning and really telling myself, this is going to be a small bump in my road. Yes, as a teenager, a few months feels like an eternity at that age. And in hindsight now, having lived longer in life, you're oh, that was nothing. You blink your eyes and 4 or 5 months goes by and you barely even notice. And I think it's just like that perspective change, but like reminding myself that it's like at the time it felt like forever. I'm so grateful for camp for creating like happy memories, creating things to look back on and really cherish.
So your treatment was only a couple months. What was it like? Sometimes the recovery process from chemo is a very long time. What was that process like after chemo ended?
I think like I was in the mentality of like I was so determined to keep up with my peers because I was in high school at the time. So when I was diagnosed, because it was over the Christmas break, I pretty much told the school, I'm done. You can grade me on what I've accomplished till now. I'm not going to do the last few weeks in January. And then in February, the plan was to do 2 credits through kind of home instruction. So I had 5 hours with a tutor every week and then, go from there. So originally my treatment plan was going to be 4 cycles of chemotherapy. And I think I was pretty consistent with like when I was feeling good and when I was not. So thankfully, very well and very healthy throughout my treatment for the most part, which I'm so blessed to have experienced that. I think I was so gung ho on catching up on my credits. So as soon as I finished like chemo, I maybe took about a month off and was like, okay, let's go. Like, I can go back to school part time and get another credit. And then if I'm well enough in summer school, I'll go back and get another credit to be caught up with my peers come September. And I think that was really driving me to be like, I just want to graduate with my peers. I just want to be in all my classes with my peers next year, which was really like pushing me and motivating me. And like looking back on it, I wish I would have taken more time to breathe and just focus on recovery. But maybe that was my own way of focusing on recovery was like, I just need to keep moving forward and I just need a goal. And I think a lot of times when I was talking to like other friends at camp and too, when you go through a cancer diagnosis in high school, a lot of times you feel like you're maybe missing out on things, whether it's parties, school dances, sports teams, and things like that. And you just want to like get back to whatever normalcy is as quickly as possible. Then after high school, it's like, okay, off to post secondary. And then kind of at the end of post secondary, I took a moment to breathe because so often it's like you don't have time to process some of the stuff in between because you're like, I just need to keep moving towards the next goal. Okay, post secondary is done. And then you're like, then what? You kind of like get to the end of post secondary and you're like, there's no more roadmap. People are doing their own thing. Some people are doing the entrepreneur route. Some people are doing trades. Some people are continuing on with master's degrees and higher education. Other people are in various jobs. And it's like there's no more like staged roadmap, if that makes sense. So it was kind
Yeah.
of like, and I know that's a common experience for people to kind of have that. I don't even know what to call. Maybe identity crisis is a good word because you've been a student all your life, and you're like, now what am I? And I think it was like that identity crisis coupled with like, oh, now I actually have time to process all these feelings and can't be like, oh, like deal with this like grief or guilt you're feeling or do your assignment. You're like, just got to keep your head down and do the assignment.
Yeah. You just got to keep moving.
Yeah, so I think that was kind of my strategy was like just keep moving. Like I remember what was it? I think it was in grade 10. They had the literacy test. And I was like just kind of at the end of my treatment and I was like I can go in and do it because the hospital's like no, you can't write it here. You're not. I don't know what they said. They're like, we're just worried you're gonna not show up the day because you're not feeling well. I'm like, okay, all right. So I ended up writing it at the school. I'm like, okay, I know the layout of the school. I'm at the end of treatment, so I'm like, the risks are low. I'm like, can I be like seated away from other people because I know other people will be coming in potentially writing this test sick if they're a little bit unwell. Had my hand sanitizer, my masks, and all that stuff. And I'm like, the risk was relatively low. That I'm like, if I got sick, we weren't delaying other cycles of chemo. And I was also super, super blessed because there was the possibility with my treatment plan to need radiation. So I was really blessed that that was a part of treatment plan that I got to skip completely. And at the time, I don't think I realized how significant that was until kind of stepping back like years later as an adult and seeing a lot of the late effects from radiation and going, holy cow, friends experiencing secondary cancers because of the radiation. And it's just like really hit home that it's like you were so blessed. And, at the time it was completely missed on me. It's like, oh, well, some people need radiation, some people need surgery, some people need chemo, some people need immunotherapy. That's just what the treatment plan is. You don't get to pick, because if you got to pick, you wouldn't pick any of this.
We got to pick,
Exactly.
The options would be very different.
Yeah, exactly.
As somebody who had to write EQAO English, I cannot believe, or actually I can believe because I know you, but I struggle with the reality that you wrote it well on chemo, because it is not a particularly easy test.
Yeah, I had accommodations. So, thankfully, I had accommodations for extra time and stuff. So, I wasn't writing in the gym. So, I was writing with the resource team. But I think I remember doing one practice quiz with a tutor in the hospital. And at the time, when you're trying to study or do school in the hospital, there's nurses coming in all the time, checking in on you, doing vitals, changing chemo bags, doctors coming in, when it works for their schedule. So sometimes you're literally like, okay, I have literally 10 people who decided to show up at the same time as the tutor. So it's really difficult to learn anything. I'm like, and my mentality was you give it a shot, right? And if you don't pass it, guess what? You get another chance to try again in grade 11 when hopefully you're not going to be going through chemotherapy.
That's fair. I remember it being a stressful experience to write it.
And I think I was stressed. I think I'd be lying to say if I wasn't stressed about it, because I wouldn't describe myself as reading and writing as my strong suit.
Yeah.
So put that on top of it. But I said, at least if you try, you get a sense of what the format is and, what type of questions. And I was like, at the end of the day, you give it your best shot and you do what you can. And whatever you can't do, you can't do. And do it again next year if you can't do it, or do the class. And I think it was that determination again that's I want to catch up with my peers, and I can catch up, be on track with my peers. And maybe it came from that fear of being different, or being able to be I can leave cancer in this grade, and it's not going to spill over into impacting the next grade, was probably where my head was at.
So you jumped straight back into high school. You went to university. What do you do now?
Yeah, right now I'm currently working in the federal government in human resources. And it's been super interesting. I really do enjoy my job. And I think it's because I enjoy the aspect of helping other people. And that's what really drew me to human resources.
Yeah, no, I can see that. You're very, even at camp, you're very driven to make sure that everyone has what they need, even for adult weeks. It's
I often would describe myself as a friend connector, if that even makes sense. As a terminology that I often say, I go there's some people who, when they have a circle of friends, they'll keep their circles separate from one another. And then there's other people who I identify myself as a friend connector, and they're always willing to open up their circles, connect people who might have things in common with each other, foster friendships between their friends, and take people under their wing, make people feel included, be open to having a conversation. And I think that's something that at adult weekend, as adults, it's more intimidating to make new friends, and especially coming into it where some of the people there at the adult weekends, they've been friends since childhood, right? So that's a really difficult bond to kind of break into. But I often, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this as well, I find a lot of the times with other survivors, sometimes I don't even know they're a survivor. but I can just tell we instantly have this special bond. And like, it's not something that's like spoken, but it's a vibe that I'll get from the person where I'm like, we just vibed really well. And later, if I find out like, oh, they also were a cancer survivor, I'm like, huh, that's what that was, you know?
Yeah, I've definitely felt that with some people, and I would say it's mostly around the dark humor.
Mm.
Like there's a level of dark humor in campers and in pediatric cancer survivors. Like we just have a very twisted take on life at times because we were dealt an awkward hand. Is
Mm-hmm.
sort of the nicest way to put it. And at the same time, like I think about adult weekends where like especially with camp now, like there have been two camps merged together.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of or a good portion of the campers that are coming have never been to the property we're at.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for us, it's like, oh, we're sort of going home for the weekend. We
Yeah.
know where we're going. We know, you know, like the permanent staff. We know where everything is.
Yeah, I think that too. It does often feel like a homecoming anytime I go to camp. And now, something that I wanted to do, like probably after my first summer as a camper, was I knew I always wanted to give back. And it's very different, like going back and volunteering. And I think back to some of the early, like adult weekends at camp, or even in the past, Pogo would kind of host something at camp where it was a conference. And I remember going to some of those earlier ones where I feel like I was just like a big camper. And then going to the ones after having volunteered, it was a different framing and a different lens of looking at things, and maybe more focused on, like helping people have a good time, helping people foster those connections, have a good time, even if it's like a little thing, like going and sitting with someone who might be sitting by themselves, to make them feel included, starting up a conversation with someone new that you've never met before, trying to get to know them, hear their story, get their take on things.
And to end, is there anything that you feel is really missing from the pediatric cancer world?
That's missing. Well, like, I think like the biggest thing would be like probably like a few things. Like,
Go. It doesn't have to be one
yeah,
thing.
yeah, no. I think like to some degree, some of that continued support, like being lifelong. And I look at organizations like Pogo, who the programming doesn't have an upper age limit, right? It's for anybody, and Pogo is the pediatric oncology group. And they offer tons of different kinds of programs and services. And I think it's some of the ones that really touch on like young adults who've survived childhood cancer, are like their vocational like program, their transition from school to careers program that really provides a lot of supports. Even they have a survivor to survivor network that provides a lot of resources to survivors. And I think it's that thing that, oftentimes when we think of pediatric cancer, we think of the kids who are actively in treatment now. And although that's super important, because if we don't do research and we don't progress, better outcomes can't happen in the future for those kids to, survive and survive with less late effects. But I think it's also that knowledge that a lot of the times when you're going through cancer treatment, there's a lot of support while you're going through the actual treatment, right? Whether it's friends, family members checking in on you during the treatment, and then kind of after, you go through that slow transition where the supports are kind of removed, right? People aren't asking as much, how's your health? People aren't thinking about, late effects. Even I think back to myself when we were first doing scans for late effects to establish baselines during treatment. They're telling me you're going to be doing this test for the rest of your life. And I was pictured myself old with gray hair, a granny in the future, having lived a full and rich life, thinking, oh, well, if I get diagnosed with something as an old granny, like, hey, everyone's going to be diagnosed with something. And I think the reality of like how soon those late effects hit people really hit me probably like a year later, hearing some friends only about a year out of treatment experiencing quite serious late effects.
I think I was a year out when my heart started to decline, and suddenly my resting heart rate was 160 beats a minute. And like that's the reality for a lot of us.
And I think that's like one of the statistics that probably keeps me up the most is like hearing that 95% of survivors aged 45 will experience some type of late effect, and that can range from a variety of things.
And not just a late effect, frequently the statistic is a life-threatening late effect. So if it is not caught, it will kill us.
Yeah. So that's probably the like thing that like continued support for survivors. And I think it's great that camp has an adult weekend that they continue to offer for us. And I'm so, so, so grateful for that. Although like my heart does kind of miss some of those pogo conferences.
See, I was too young to experience a pogo conference in person.
I think one of the things that made the pogo conferences special was you had any age of survivor. So you had people who were potentially in their 40s, 50s, attending there with you. And I think for me, I found it a little bit hopeful and inspiring to see some of these survivors and meet some survivors who had the same type of cancer as me, and kind of see how the treatment plan has progressed, comparing notes with each other, hearing their stories of potential late effects, things to be on my radar, what ages were they? And, everyone's different, right? But I think it's something that really motivates me and pushes me to try and live the best life that I can. So I think definitely like I miss kind of connecting with that larger community of older survivors, but I do see the need that camp is filling where I think the biggest struggle is, right when you're graduating from your hospital, potentially your pediatric hospital, you're navigating the adult hospital world where you're having to self-advocate for yourself. You're navigating potentially a transition from high school to whatever's next, whether it's the workforce, whether it's a post-secondary program. And that's like a big transition. And also like kind of that transition of like, okay, let's say you go on to post-secondary. What do you do after that? Right. And I think those are some like big transitions for anybody, regardless of having cancer or not. But I think having had pediatric cancer adds extra barriers and challenges, such as, potentially advocating for disabilities, be that in the workplace or in an educational setting, and navigating managing your own health and appointments, because sometimes the hospital is quite far. They're not going to book all your appointments on one nice day to make it convenient for you to travel in. They may not even they may sometimes book the follow-up before the scan. And I go, what would we discuss at the follow-up if there are no scan results? But yeah, no, like I think probably the biggest things is like continued support for survivors for life kind of thing. And I think it's tough because I often say like we're not the cute kids, that people are like, ooh, I'd love to support that. We're now like the average looking adults, who it's not nearly as fun to give money to.
Yeah, and like even in pediatric oncology campaigns, you rarely see teenagers.
That is true.
It's always little kids. And the reality is a good portion of us get diagnosed as teenagers.
Very true. But I also wonder, is it the teenagers don't want to be a part of that campaign too?
I don't know.
Because I was like, I feel like when I was going through it as a teenager, I feel like I was very private. Like I wouldn't have wanted to do something like that at the time. But yeah, I think it's just like more advocacy, more research, less aggressive treatments that impact like long-term effects. And it's tough because there are so many different types of cancers that impact pediatrics. So, it's usually the more popular ones that tend to get more advancement than the less popular ones.
Yes. And by more popular, we mean the ones that get more cases diagnosed annually. Because there's no pediatric cancer that's popular.
That's true.
But yeah, there is a big, like when we talk about the number of pediatric cancers, we're talking about 200 plus cancers that all fall under the umbrella of being classified as pediatric cancers. And like one of my chemotherapies for my cancer was a derivative of mustard gas created in the 1950s. I feel like science should have evolved since then.
Yeah.
I feel like we should have something better than that.
Yeah. No, it's scary to look at some of the years that some of the drugs were created in, and to think that there's been no advancement for multiple decades consecutively, and no, well, maybe not no advancement, but no new drugs,
yeah,
for multiple decades, because there has been different advancements, but no new drugs per se.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to like think of that and go like, okay, like how much progress has been made,
Yeah, and I would say, like, I always look back at our bubble of cancer and camp, and I look at like how many friends have died of secondary cancer since we were campers, how many friends have had relapses that have been incurable because it was the same cancer that came back and it was chemotherapy resistant. We are just one pocket.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't a very big data pool, but I know too many people.
I have to like agree with you on that there's too many people, and at the same time, like sometimes it is like hopeful, seeing friends diagnosed with secondary cancers, pulling through, persevering, keeping on going into remission for those other cancers. And it's just really like reassuring to see that too. But I have to agree, there's too many that have been lost, due to, and most of the time it wouldn't be their initial cancer diagnosis. Most of the time it's the late effects, the secondary cancers from the treatment that end up, being the reason why they're not here.
Yeah. Well, on that very depressing note, thanks for talking with me.
No, anytime. It was lovely chatting with you.